Before the arrival of European settlers, the land now known as North America was home to a vast and vibrant tapestry of Native American cultures, each distinct, deeply rooted, and intricately tied to the earth. From the icy tundras of the far north to the warm deserts of the southwest, from the vast Great Plains to the dense woodlands of the east, Indigenous peoples lived in harmony with nature, developing sophisticated societies that reflected the rhythms of their environments. There were over 500 tribes, each with its own language, spiritual beliefs, and social systems. The Iroquois Confederacy in the Northeast, for example, was a model of political alliance and democratic governance, while the Pueblo peoples of the Southwest built enduring adobe cities and developed complex irrigation systems to sustain their agriculture. Tribes like the Lakota roamed the Great Plains following buffalo herds, while the Pacific Northwest peoples constructed intricate totem poles and lived in communal longhouses, relying on the bounty of the sea. Each tribe had its own stories, dances, songs, and ceremonies, passed down from generation to generation, weaving a shared understanding of life, death, creation, and the sacredness of the natural world. Daily life was deeply spiritual, whether planting corn, crafting tools, or preparing for seasonal festivals. Everything was done with intention and reverence. Nature was not seen as a resource to be controlled, but as a living relative. Trees, rivers, animals, and even stones were seen as possessing spirit and wisdom. The connection to land was not merely economic, but ancestral and spiritual. It was the land of their stories, their ancestors, and their purpose. Children were raised not just by parents, but by the entire community, taught through storytelling, example, and gentle guidance. Women often held powerful roles, sometimes as clan mothers, spiritual leaders, or keepers of history. Men, too, had sacred responsibilities as hunters, protectors, and ceremonial leaders. Though their societies varied greatly, nomadic or settled, matrilineal or patrilineal, hunter-gatherers or agriculturalists, all native cultures shared a profound sense of balance, respect, and reciprocity. There was no concept of owning land the way Europeans later introduced. Instead, land belonged to all, and all belonged to the land. Time was cyclical, not linear, measured by seasons, ceremonies, and the movements of stars. The world was alive with signs and meanings: a bird's flight, a dream, a change in the wind. Even illness was viewed not just physically, but as a disruption in spiritual harmony, calling for healing of the soul as much as the body. Storytelling was central, each tale layered with moral lessons, ancestral knowledge, and connections to the cosmos. Some tribes honored the trickster figure, who used cleverness to teach humility and balance. Others spoke of the Great Spirit or the Creator, or of ancient animals who shaped the land during the time before time. Far from being primitive, as once wrongly described, Native American societies had complex political systems, scientific knowledge, astronomical awareness, and artistic traditions that rivaled any in the world. Their pottery, beadwork, basketry, and textiles weren't just beautiful. They were symbols of identity, expressions of reverence, and links to spiritual realms. Dances were not mere entertainment, but rituals that opened gateways between worlds. Drumming carried the heartbeat of the earth itself. This was a world where the sacred and the everyday were one, where community and identity were inseparable from nature, and where knowledge was not written in books, but lived, felt, and remembered. In this first part, we begin to understand the incredible richness and diversity of the Native American experience before the great disruptions of colonization, an era of peace with the earth, wisdom passed through generations, and a deep, enduring sense of belonging to something far greater than oneself. Long before the distant sails of European ships ever appeared on the horizon, the continent of North America was alive with the rhythms of ancient civilizations, thriving, evolving, and adapting to the lands that nurtured them. This vast stretch of time, known as the pre-Columbian era, was not a void before history, but a deep and living chapter filled with innovation, resilience, and beauty. For thousands of years, indigenous peoples shaped the environment, cultivating crops like maize, beans, and squash, the three sisters, whose harmonious growth mirrored the cooperative spirit of the people who grew them. In the Mississippi River Valley, the Mississippian culture built great earthen mounds that rose like temples from the fertile soil, with cities such as Cahokia, larger than London in its prime, serving as centers of trade, ceremony, and governance. These cities were marked by wooden palisades, central plazas, and platform mounds upon which leaders and priests lived and held rituals. In the arid Southwest, the ancestral Puebloans, often referred to as the Anasazi, engineered elaborate cliff dwellings and multi-story stone homes, constructing entire communities tucked into canyon walls, protected from the scorching sun and harsh winds. They developed advanced irrigation systems that carried water across miles of desert to nourish their fields. In the north, the Inuit people mastered survival in one of the harshest climates on Earth, fashioning tools from bone, hunting with remarkable precision, and building igloos and skin tents that allowed them to live in balance with the polar extremes. Along the Pacific coast, the rich marine environment allowed the Tlingit, Haida, and other tribes to flourish with a diet of salmon, shellfish, and sea mammals, and to express their cosmology and clan histories through towering totem poles and carved cedar canoes. Across the Great Plains, before the introduction of the horse, native peoples used carefully coordinated foot hunts and fire management to track bison and steward the grasslands. In the dense eastern woodlands, the Algonquian and Iroquoian tribes developed complex village networks, practiced seasonal agriculture, and crafted birch bark canoes that glided across rivers like whispers on water. Far from static, these societies traded goods, knowledge, and ideas along vast networks that spanned the continent. Obsidian from the Rockies, shells from the Gulf, and copper from the Great Lakes have all been found far from their places of origin, evidence of a continent interconnected long before maps and borders. Ceremonies tied communities to the stars, the earth, and each other, marking solstices, harvests, and rites of passage. Medicine people and spiritual leaders served as healers, seers, and keepers of the sacred knowledge passed down orally through chants, songs, and stories, older than memory. Art, too, was everywhere, not as a luxury, but as a living language. Pottery told stories, baskets held prayers, and clothing was adorned with symbols of identity and protection. Knowledge of astronomy allowed many native peoples to track seasons and stars with incredible accuracy. The Mayans to the south may have built stone observatories, but even farther north, indigenous communities were tracking the heavens in their own profound ways, aligning buildings to solstices, creating calendars based on the moon, and understanding the cycles of nature not only for survival, but for sacred timing. Warfare was not uncommon, but it was often ritualized, with clear rules and boundaries, unlike the total war brought by colonization. Most conflicts were resolved through diplomacy, exchange, and the honoring of alliances, with peace councils and ceremonial gift-giving serving as crucial tools for stability. Each generation learned not only the practical skills needed to survive, how to track an animal, weave a basket, or store food for winter, but also the deeper truths, how to listen to the land, how to honor ancestors, and how to live in right relationship with all beings. The pre-Columbian era was a time of deep rootedness and flourishing, not in the sense of conquest or monuments, but in the quiet strength of a people who knew their place in the web of life. It was a time of reverence for the invisible threads that connect sky to soil, spirit to stone, people to planet. As we close our eyes and drift into the past, let us remember that before this land was claimed and renamed, it pulsed with the heartbeat of 100 nations, each unique, each sacred, and each still whispering through the trees, the rivers, and the wind. When the first European ships arrived on the shores of what would become the Americas, they carried more than curious explorers. They carried new ways of thinking, foreign customs, unfamiliar animals, and invisible illnesses. For the native peoples who had lived in harmony with the rhythms of the land for millennia, this moment marked the beginning of a long and complex chapter of disruption, adaptation, and profound transformation. At first, the encounters were tentative, curious eyes meeting across stretches of shoreline or through the cover of dense forests. Some tribes saw opportunities in these strange newcomers, tools made of iron, glass beads that sparkled like stars, woven cloth softer than anything spun from native fibers. Early exchanges were often peaceful, even hopeful. The Wampanoag and the Pilgrims shared food and taught each other new skills. Tribes like the Huron and the French formed trade relationships that brought furs across the ocean in exchange for guns and metalware. But behind these early interactions, deeper forces were already shifting the world beneath native feet. The Europeans brought not only trade, but a worldview centered on ownership, conquest, and extraction. Concepts that clashed with the native understanding of land as sacred and shared. More devastating still were the diseases. Smallpox, measles, influenza, viruses that native immune systems had never encountered, swept through communities like wildfires, leaving sorrow in their wake. In some places, entire villages were lost, and with them, elders who held the oral histories, the medicine people who knew the sacred plants, the leaders who guided with wisdom. The silence left by these deaths was deep and disorienting, and it shook the roots of many native societies. Some tribes believed these illnesses were supernatural punishments or signs of imbalance, and their spiritual practices evolved to try and restore harmony. Yet even in the face of these staggering losses, native communities showed resilience. They learned to navigate the changing landscape, to broker new alliances, and to use the tools and knowledge brought by Europeans to their own ends. Horses, introduced by the Spanish, transformed the lives of many plains tribes, offering speed, mobility, and a new way of life centered around buffalo hunting on horseback. The Comanche and Lakota, among others, became powerful equestrian cultures, reshaping their economies and warfare with remarkable agility. Trade networks expanded, often centered around European goods, but with native agency and adaptation at the heart of them. New ideas spread too. Christianity made inroads, sometimes peacefully, sometimes forcefully. Some tribes welcomed new spiritual concepts and blended them with their own beliefs, creating syncretic practices that honored both the old and the new. Others resisted conversion, holding tightly to their ceremonies, their chants, their stories whispered around sacred fires. Yet not all contact was benign. Settlements expanded, forests were cleared, rivers were dammed, treaties were signed and then broken. The once slow and seasonal pace of life became hurried, unpredictable, and tense. Land that had always been open was now marked with fences and borders. European settlers often misunderstood native customs, mistook diplomacy for submission, and viewed cultural difference as inferiority. As colonization deepened, it became harder to live as before. The game grew scarce. The forests, once endless, were swallowed by farms and towns. For many tribes, the arrival of Europeans meant choosing between many hard paths: fight, flee, adapt, or find a way to live alongside. But even amidst all this, native communities endured. They remembered. They adapted. They held council and sang songs of resilience. They painted their histories onto hides, wove their sorrows into baskets, and whispered ancient prayers to the rising sun. The impact of European contact was not just one of loss. It was also a time of survival, of painful transformation, and of quiet strength. The world around them had changed, but the core of who they were, their respect for the earth, their stories, their connection to the ancestors, remained unbroken. In the deep stillness of night, if you listen closely, you can still hear the echoes of those early encounters, the creak of wooden ships, the distant murmur of translated words, the shared meals by the fire, and the unspoken hope that two worlds might find a way to coexist. That hope would be tested in the centuries to come, but in this moment of first contact, it still shimmered, fragile, uncertain, yet filled with possibility. As the trickle of European arrivals became a flood, the fragile balance of early contact gave way to a more complex and often troubling period, the era of colonial encounters. These were not just meetings of people, but collisions of worldviews, ambitions, and deeply rooted ways of life. From the dense forests of New England to the fertile lands of the Carolinas, from the swamps of the Southeast to the vast Mississippi Valley, European powers laid claim to native lands, building forts, missions, and settlements, often on territory already rich with native history, memory, and sacred meaning. The English, the French, the Spanish, and later the Dutch and others, each brought their own agendas and alliances, and native peoples responded not passively, but strategically, navigating, resisting, negotiating, and sometimes embracing new realities with remarkable adaptability. Many native nations saw these new powers not as inevitable conquerors, but as potential allies or tools to be used in pursuit of their own survival and goals. Tribes like the Huron and Algonquin formed strong relationships with the French, exchanging furs for weapons, cloth, and tools, while the Iroquois League became expert in playing European powers against one another to maintain autonomy and advantage. In the Southeast, the Creek, Cherokee, and Chickasaw engaged in intricate diplomacy, using negotiations, trade, and intermarriage to shape their destinies in a world growing ever more complex. Some native leaders, like Powhatan in Virginia or Opechancanough after him, initially extended gestures of goodwill to English settlers, only to see promises broken and trust eroded as settlements grew and land hunger intensified. The Spanish, too, ventured north from their empire in Mexico, establishing missions and presidios across the Southwest and into Florida and California. Their encounters with Pueblo, Apache, and other native peoples often revolved around forced labor, religious conversion, and cultural suppression. But even here, resistance was alive. In 1680, the Pueblo Revolt in present-day New Mexico saw indigenous warriors rise up in unison, expelling the Spanish from their lands for over a decade, a rare and powerful moment of collective liberation. Across the continent, resistance was not only physical, but cultural and spiritual. Native religions were practiced in secret. Stories were passed down, despite efforts to silence them, and traditional lifeways were preserved under the cover of darkness or woven quietly into the new patterns of life. But colonial expansion brought more than just settlers and soldiers. It brought shifting borders, new diseases, and increasing economic dependency. The fur trade, once mutually beneficial, began to tip the balance, drawing tribes into cycles of debt and conflict. European goods became necessities, and rivalries between native nations, sometimes encouraged or manipulated by colonial powers, led to wars over territory, trade routes, and survival itself. The Beaver Wars, for instance, saw the Iroquois Confederacy expanding and consolidating power, pushing other tribes westward in search of safety and new homelands. Meanwhile, the colonists' appetite for land seemed endless. Treaties were made and broken, often under duress or through deceit. What might have begun as a few scattered farms grew into plantations, towns, and cities, eating away at traditional hunting grounds, fishing sites, and sacred spaces. For many native peoples, colonialism was not a sudden catastrophe, but a slow, creeping shadow. It came in the form of missionaries who told them their gods were false. It came in fences that carved up shared landscapes. It came in the hum of axes clearing forests, in the strangers settling beside rivers where ancestors once danced and prayed. And yet, even as colonial power grew, so too did native resilience. Some adapted, incorporating European tools and methods into their lives. Others resisted, launching raids, forming confederacies, and defending their lands with courage. Leaders like Metacom, called King Philip by the English, rose to confront colonial expansion in New England. His war, though ultimately crushed, left a lasting legacy of native resistance and unity. Amid these shifting sands, native identity remained strong. Ceremonies continued in hidden groves. Languages were spoken in whispers. Children were still taught the old ways, even as they learned to navigate this new world. The colonial encounter was not just a story of loss. It was also a story of fierce endurance. Native nations, despite every hardship, remained present, thinking, feeling, and dreaming their way forward. As the stars wheeled overhead and fires flickered in the night, people gathered to remember who they were and where they came from. The land, though scarred, still remembered too. And in that remembering, in that breath between then and now, we see not only what was taken, but all that was never truly lost. As the colonial frontier grew and the newly formed United States emerged after independence, the relationship between Native American nations and the newcomers entered a more formalized, yet still deeply unequal, phase, one defined by treaties. On paper, treaties were solemn agreements, binding contracts between sovereign nations, often signed with ceremony, witnessed by officials, and sealed with symbolic gifts or handshakes. But in practice, these treaties became instruments of displacement, deception, and disinheritance, as native lands were slowly but steadily taken, divided, and sold. For the United States government, treaties were a legal mechanism to acquire territory. Millions of acres exchanged for promises that were rarely kept. For many native nations, treaties were a desperate means of survival, a way to protect what little remained, to secure peace, or to prevent outright annihilation. The treaty era, stretching from the late 1700s through the 1800s, was marked by a dizzying series of negotiations, often conducted under pressure or threat. Native leaders, many of them wise and eloquent, traveled long distances to distant capitals, where they pleaded for justice, tried to explain their connection to their homelands, and asked only for the right to remain where their ancestors had walked. Some treaties were agreed to in good faith, with genuine hope. Others were signed under coercion, misunderstanding, or outright manipulation. Translators twisted words. Boundaries were misrepresented. Chiefs were pressured, bribed, or misled. The ink had barely dried before settlers moved in. Loggers, miners, farmers, claiming land as if it had never belonged to anyone before. With every treaty, the native land base shrank. Whole nations were pushed westward, sometimes again and again, in a tragic pattern of removal. In the Ohio Valley, in the Great Lakes region, across the prairies and into the plains, native peoples were told they must move just a little farther to make way for the expansion of a hungry republic. The Louisiana Purchase, the Indian Removal Act, the annexation of Texas, the gold rush, each of these moments brought more pressure, more treaties, and more loss. By the mid-1800s, the once vast lands inhabited by native peoples had been carved into increasingly small and isolated parcels, many of them designated as reservations. Lands often far from ancestral homes, often harsh and infertile, given not out of compassion but out of convenience. The treaties often promised much: protection, food, tools, schools, annuities. But these promises were broken more often than kept. Supplies never arrived. Schools became tools of cultural erasure. Hunger and disease spread on reservations. Tribes that had been self-sufficient farmers, hunters, and gatherers were now confined, dependent on rations, stripped not only of land, but of dignity. Still, many native communities found ways to endure. They adapted their farming to unfamiliar soil. They learned to work within and around U.S. law. They sent emissaries, wrote letters, filed complaints. Some sued in American courts, seeking to hold the government to its word. Each treaty tells a story, not just of land exchanged, but of hopes held, hearts broken, and resilience tested. The Treaty of Fort Laramie, the Treaty of Greenville, the Treaty of New Echota, names on documents that reshaped entire nations. The stories behind them are deeply human, of leaders like Black Kettle, who believed in peace until it cost him his life, of women who carried songs and ceremonies to new lands, of elders who remembered every river, every hill, even after they had been forced to leave them behind. Even in loss, they resisted. Some fled west or north to avoid relocation. Others took up arms to defend their homelands. Still others, quietly but firmly, held on to their languages, their traditions, and their memories, keeping alive what could not be taken by force or law. The treaty era left scars on the landscape and on the spirit, but it also left records, proof that native nations existed, negotiated, and resisted. Today, many tribes still cite these treaties as legal foundations for their sovereignty, pointing to them as evidence of their rights. Though the treaties were often violated, they were still made between nations, and they carry the weight of that truth. As we lie in the stillness of night and imagine the slow erosion of homelands, we must also honor the unyielding strength it took to survive that loss. The treaties may have taken land, but they could not take the soul of the people. That remains, humming softly in the winds across the plains, in the rivers that still flow, and in the songs that are still sung in languages older than any map. In the quiet shadows of the 1830s, a sorrowful chapter unfolded in the heart of America, one etched not in ink, but in footsteps, tears, and silence. The Trail of Tears was not a single road, but a series of forced journeys made by entire nations of native peoples who were uprooted from their ancestral homelands and made to walk hundreds, even thousands of miles to lands west of the Mississippi River. This tragic episode was the direct result of the Indian Removal Act of 1830, signed into law by President Andrew Jackson, a man determined to clear native peoples from the southeastern United States to make way for white settlers and plantation agriculture. The law promised that relocation would be peaceful and fair, that the tribes would be compensated and supported, but in reality, it brought devastation and death. The Cherokee, Muskogee, Creek, Seminole, Chickasaw, and Choctaw, often called the Five Civilized Tribes due to their extensive efforts to adopt European American customs, languages, and political systems, were among the first targets. Many of these nations had built schools, churches, farms, and even written constitutions modeled on that of the United States. The Cherokee Nation had their own printing press, their own written language developed by Sequoyah, and a court system. But none of these achievements could protect them from the land hunger that gripped American expansionism. In 1831, the Choctaw became the first to be removed under this new policy. They traveled in winter, with little food, few supplies, and often no shelter. It is said that snowflakes fell onto their faces as they crossed frozen rivers barefoot, many of them succumbing to pneumonia and starvation along the way. The Creek followed in 1834, then the Chickasaw in 1837. In 1838, the Cherokee were marched from their lush homelands in Georgia, Tennessee, and North Carolina to what is now Oklahoma. This journey alone would claim the lives of over 4,000 men, women, and children, nearly a quarter of the Cherokee population at the time. Soldiers drove them forward like cattle. Families were torn from their homes with no warning, their belongings left behind, their homes looted and burned. Elderly grandparents, young children, and even pregnant women were forced to walk for weeks on end. Along the roadsides, makeshift graves were dug with bare hands, sometimes shallow, sometimes marked with nothing at all. The landscape became a graveyard, the wind heavy with mourning. Even more haunting was the silence, stories left untold, names forgotten, ceremonies interrupted mid-song. Yet even through the pain, The people carried with them what could not be taken: language, memory, prayer. Elders whispered stories into the ears of children. Mothers hummed songs as lullabies while crossing rivers swollen with winter rains, and medicine people gathered herbs wherever they could, believing that even in strange lands, the earth would listen. Some resisted, like the Seminole in Florida, who fought back with guerrilla tactics deep in the swamps and refused removal for decades. Others tried to use the American legal system. The Cherokee even won a case in the U.S. Supreme Court, Worcester v. Georgia, affirming their sovereignty. But President Jackson ignored the ruling, and the removals went on. The name Trail of Tears comes from the Cherokee, Nuna Dal Isunyi, which means the trail where they cried. But the tears were not only Cherokee. They belonged to every mother who buried a child by the road, every elder who turned a final glance to the mountains they would never see again, every warrior who felt his strength break under the weight of grief. Yet even this journey of sorrow was not the end. In the unfamiliar lands of the West, the people began again. They built new towns. They planted new fields. They held councils beneath different stars. And though their hearts still ached for the homelands behind them, they never stopped being who they were. Their languages, songs, dances, and traditions endured. The Trail of Tears was not just a tragedy. It was a testament to the unbreakable spirit of a people who carried the embers of their culture through the storm. As we close our eyes tonight, we might imagine the crunch of frost underfoot, the rustle of wind in bare trees, the soft murmuring of feet marching onward. We might hear the distant sound of a drum, like a heartbeat, steady and slow. And remember, these roads are still remembered. These tears are still sacred. And though the trail was long and the cost was great, the people did not vanish. They survived. After the long journeys, after the sorrowful migrations and broken treaties, many Native American tribes found themselves on reservations, small, unfamiliar parcels of land designated by the U.S. government, often far from their ancestral homes. The idea of a reservation was presented as a compromise, a place where Native peoples could live in peace, protected from settlers, allowed to govern themselves. But in truth, these lands were often barren, remote, and restrictive. For a people who had once moved freely across mountains, rivers, and plains, who lived with the seasons and followed the herds, the reservation system felt like a cage, a boundary not only of land, but of spirit. Life on the reservation in the 19th century was harsh and uncertain. The soil was often poor, making farming difficult. The buffalo and other game were gone or had been driven to near extinction, leaving hunting almost impossible. Many tribes had been forced into sedentary lifestyles that contradicted their cultural rhythms. Rations promised by the government, flour, salt pork, beans, coffee, arrived late, spoiled, or not at all. Starvation became common, and reliance on federal agents, known as Indian agents, grew. These agents held enormous power, controlling food, supplies, and even the ability to leave the reservation. Some were fair, but many were corrupt, treating Native peoples with disdain and cruelty, funneling resources away for personal gain. Still, within these tightly drawn lines, Native communities did what they had always done. They adapted, resisted, remembered. Teepees gave way to log cabins or sod houses. Beadwork evolved to reflect new symbols and materials, and old ceremonies were sometimes hidden, performed in secret under the cover of darkness or behind closed doors. Elders taught children the stories of their people, even as government-run boarding schools tried to erase their languages and customs. On many reservations, missionary churches appeared, offering religion in exchange for food or education. But many native people balanced the new beliefs with traditional spirituality, praying in 2 languages, holding both the Bible and the medicine bundle close to their hearts. Government policy continued to evolve, often with devastating results. The Dawes Act of 1887 aimed to assimilate native peoples by dividing reservation land into private allotments, usually 160 acres per family. The remaining land, which was called surplus, was sold off to white settlers. This law not only broke up communal landholding, which was central to many native cultures, but also led to massive land loss. Millions of acres of native land passed out of tribal hands, often through fraud, coercion, or simple confusion over legal documents. By the early 20th century, Native Americans had lost nearly 2/3 of the land they had been assigned under treaties. And yet, amid all this, life continued. Children played games under wide skies. Mothers gathered wild herbs and taught their daughters to sew and bead. Fathers fished in rivers and tried to teach their sons the skills their own fathers had once passed down in the now vanished hunting grounds. Storytelling flourished. At night, beside fires, under the canvas of stars, grandparents spoke of the old days, the great plains before the fences, the buffalo running like thunder, the songs that called the morning sun. They spoke of ancestors, of sacred places now miles away, of warriors and dreamers. They taught endurance through memory. Many tribes formed councils, creating new systems of governance that blended traditional models with new realities. Ceremonies that had been banned, like the sun dance or the ghost dance, survived underground, carried from heart to heart. Art thrived. Pottery, weaving, carving, painting. These weren't just crafts, but quiet acts of defiance and remembrance. Every pattern told a story. Every design honored an ancestor. There were moments of hope, too. Visitors came who wanted to learn, not just to take. Anthropologists, artists, and allies recorded songs, stories, and languages. Some Native leaders traveled to Washington, D.C. to speak directly to Congress, demanding rights and recognition. Others joined the U.S. military, fought in wars, and proved again and again that Native peoples were not relics of the past, but citizens of the present, deeply woven into the nation's story. As we rest in the quiet of this moment, we might imagine the slow life of the reservation, a grandmother weaving by lamplight, a boy watching birds fly over a dusty ridge, a man walking to the agency office in worn boots, hoping for fair treatment. We might hear the wind brushing over grasslands, the soft echo of a prayer spoken in Lakota, Navajo, or Ojibwe. Life on the reservation was full of hardship, yes, but also of quiet courage. It was a time of holding on, of protecting the flame of identity through long winters and uncertain dawns. That flame, though dimmed, was never extinguished. As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, the U.S. government intensified its efforts to reshape Native American lives, not just through land policies and reservations, but through something deeper and more invasive: the mind and the soul of Native youth. This was the era of the boarding schools, a campaign of cultural suppression wrapped in the language of education. On the surface, these schools were meant to teach reading, writing, arithmetic, and practical skills. But in truth, they were designed to strip away identity, one child at a time. The mission was simple, yet chilling. Kill the Indian and save the man, as Captain Richard Henry Pratt, founder of the Carlisle Indian Industrial School, infamously declared. Across the United States and Canada, Native children were taken, sometimes by force, sometimes through coercion or promises of opportunity, and placed in distant government or church-run institutions. Many were hundreds of miles away from their homes. Parents were told their children would be better off learning the ways of the white world. Some were threatened with food rations being cut off if they refused. Once inside, the children's long hair was cut short. Traditional clothing was replaced with uniforms. Native languages were forbidden. Speaking them could mean punishment, extra chores, confinement, or worse. The children were given new names, English names, and told to forget the ones their families had whispered lovingly to them since birth. The day-to-day life inside boarding schools was often rigid, cold, and isolating. Boys were taught to farm or work in trades, while girls were trained in domestic duties, cooking, sewing, cleaning, so they could serve as labor in white households. Discipline was strict, and affection was rare. Many children were lonely, homesick, and confused, struggling to make sense of a world that insisted everything they had known before was wrong. Letters home were censored. Visits were limited. Some children never made it home at all. Illness spread easily in crowded dormitories, and many graves today still remain on the edges of these school grounds, unmarked and silent, holding the names and spirits of those who never returned. Yet even in this bleak environment, small rebellions sparked quietly. In stolen moments, a child might whisper in her native tongue to a friend under her blanket at night. A boy might carve a traditional pattern into a desk, or hum a forbidden song when no one was listening. Memory and identity flickered like candlelight, fragile but unbroken. Some children survived and went on to become leaders, artists, and storytellers, carrying with them both the scars of what they had endured and the strength of what they had saved inside themselves. Others came home changed, caught between two worlds, no longer fully at ease in either. The boarding school system did not end quickly. It stretched on well into the 20th century. Even as the physical conditions of some schools improved, the underlying goal remained the same: assimilation. It was only in the late 1900s that major reform efforts began, and Native voices grew louder, demanding justice, recognition, and healing. Many survivors began to speak out, sharing their stories in public forums, in books, in courtrooms. Their courage opened the way for truth and reconciliation processes in both the United States and Canada. Governments began to acknowledge the harm done. Apologies were issued. Ceremonies were held to bring lost children home in spirit. Some schools were transformed into cultural centers or museums, preserving the truth so that it would never be forgotten again. Despite the pain, many Native communities reclaimed what had been taken. Language revitalization programs sprang up in homes, schools, and tribal centers. Elders taught traditional songs, dances, and stories to new generations. Cultural camps were held in summer, where children learned to fish, bead, and speak in the words of their ancestors. What had once been hidden was now being celebrated again, with pride. From the ashes of silence, a powerful chorus rose, sung by those who had once been told not to sing. As you close your eyes tonight and let your thoughts drift like leaves on a gentle stream, imagine a child standing in a schoolyard, gazing at the horizon, remembering the sound of her grandmother's voice. Imagine her holding on to it, keeping it warm inside her heart like a small ember. And in that quiet place, know that even the coldest attempts to erase a people could not succeed. Because identity lives not only in the spoken word, but in the silent strength of remembering. And in every generation that followed, those memories blossomed once again. Through the long arc of history, even in the quietest moments of despair, there have always been voices that would not be silenced. Even after the lands were taken, the songs forbidden, the children separated from their families, the spirit of resistance endured like a fire smoldering beneath ashes. In this part of the story, we listen closely, not to the loud battles of armies, but to the soft, steady uprising of memory, of identity, and of hope. Resistance among Native American peoples was never just a single act or event. It was a long, ongoing rhythm, sometimes quiet, sometimes thunderous, expressed in ways both large and small, seen and unseen. And in time, that resistance began to stir into something more, a reawakening. In the early 20th century, many Native leaders began organizing in new ways, building pan-tribal alliances and speaking out in courts, newspapers, and legislative halls. They challenged policies that treated them as wards of the state, not sovereign nations. They petitioned for voting rights, land restitution, and the ability to govern themselves once more. One important milestone came in 1924, when Native Americans were finally granted U.S. citizenship. Yet even this recognition came with complications. Many still could not vote, and sovereignty, true self-determination, remained elusive. Still, the foundation had been laid, and the voices were growing stronger. Then came the 1930s, and with it, the Indian Reorganization Act. This piece of legislation marked a shift. It ended the forced allotment of tribal lands and encouraged tribes to form self-governing councils. Though imperfect and sometimes paternalistic in its implementation, it was one of the first official acknowledgments that the federal government had erred, and that Native cultures and governments were not problems to be solved, but nations to be respected. Some tribes used this opportunity to rebuild political structures. Others used it to protect sacred lands or revive cultural practices. It was a step, not the destination, but a turning towards something long lost. By the 1960s and 1970s, the fire of resistance burned more visibly. Inspired by the civil rights movement and global decolonization, a new generation of Native activists took to the streets, the courts, and the airwaves. The American Indian Movement, AIM, founded in 1968, stood at the forefront of this resurgence. Their bold actions, such as the occupation of Alcatraz Island in 1969 and the standoff at Wounded Knee in 1973, drew international attention. They demanded that treaties be honored, that land be returned, and that Native voices be heard. These were not easy times. The resistance was met with surveillance, arrests, and violence. But it was also met with solidarity, visibility, and most importantly, progress. Out of this movement came a broader awakening of culture, language, and pride. Native authors began writing novels and poetry that told their truths in their own words. Native filmmakers captured the realities of reservation life, and artists blended traditional forms with contemporary themes. Language programs sprouted like green shoots after a long winter, led by elders who still remembered the old sounds and young people eager to reclaim them. Sacred ceremonies once outlawed were revived. Powwows became not just cultural events, but affirmations of endurance. The beat of the drum, steady and deep, echoed the heartbeat of a people who had never truly been broken. Legal victories followed, some slow and hard-won, but vital. Tribes regained control over schools, health services, and natural resources. Courts affirmed hunting and fishing rights guaranteed by treaty. Sacred sites were protected from development. The concept of tribal sovereignty, once denied, became a central principle in policy and law. Native nations reasserted their right to govern themselves, not as relics of the past, but as living, breathing societies with a future. This reawakening was not without its pain. Generations had suffered under the weight of history, poverty, addiction, broken families, and loss. But alongside the struggle was healing. Sweat lodges were built again. Songs were sung over the sick and the grieving. Stories were passed down, not only by elders, but by school teachers, filmmakers, and digital storytellers. Youth programs, language camps, and cultural workshops began to fill in the gaps left by history. And as the fires of the past warmed the present, a new strength began to take root. Tonight, as you lie still, imagine a forest just before spring, silent but not empty, every branch holding the promise of renewal. Imagine the soft rustle of moccasins on a trail once forbidden, now walked again with pride. Listen for the wind, carrying not sorrow this time, but a chant rising from the earth. Words of resistance, yes, but also of revival. The people did not fade into the pages of history. They endured, they returned, and in the quiet light of dawn, they began to rise again. Long before the arrival of settlers, before borders were drawn and lands were taken, the peoples of North America lived in deep, reverent relationship with the world around them. Their spirituality was not separate from their daily lives. It was their life, woven into the earth beneath their feet, the sky above, the rivers that flowed, and the animals that shared the land. These traditions, diverse across hundreds of nations, tribes, and cultures, were sacred threads connecting them not only to the Creator, but to each other, to ancestors, and to the future. Even during the darkest times, through colonization, forced removal, and cultural suppression, these traditions endured, whispered in prayers, sung in secret, and carried forward in hearts that refused to forget. For many Native peoples, spirituality begins with balance, a harmony between the physical and the spiritual, the human and the natural. There is no separation between the sacred and the ordinary. Every rock, every tree, every drop of rain holds spirit, a presence that is honored, not used. The land is not property. It is relative. The earth is mother. The sky is father. The animals are brothers and sisters. The four directions, north, east, south, and west, are not just compass points, but guides and guardians. The sun is a giver of life. The moon watches over dreams. This is a world alive with meaning. And in that world, every act, planting, hunting, speaking, even walking, is a prayer. Ceremonies are the lifeblood of this spiritual world. Each tribe has its own sacred rituals, some private and specific to certain clans or families, others shared across nations. There are naming ceremonies, healing rituals, dances of thanksgiving, and rites of passage marking the movement from childhood to adulthood. The sun dance, practiced by plains tribes, is one of the most powerful and demanding, a days-long ceremony of fasting, dancing, and sacrifice, performed to renew life and honor the Creator. In the Southwest, the Pueblo peoples perform dances to bring rain, to bless the harvest, to give thanks for all that sustains life. In the North, the Inuit have drum dances that speak to the spirit world, calling on ancestors for guidance and strength. The sweat lodge is a sacred place of purification, dark, warm, and womb-like. Inside, stones are heated until they glow, and water is poured over them to release steam. Songs are sung, prayers are spoken. The sweat cleanses not only the body, but the soul. It is a place of release, of forgiveness, of returning to balance. In some traditions, the sacred pipe is smoked, a symbol of peace, used to carry prayers upward with the smoke. The pipe connects earth and sky, speaking the language of the ancestors, reminding all who gather of their responsibilities to the land, to the people, and to the Creator. These practices are not mere rituals. They are living relationships. Spirituality is taught not in temples or books, but through stories told by firelight, through songs sung while harvesting herbs, through dreams and visions that come when one is quiet enough to listen. The medicine wheel, with its circular form, represents the cycles of life: birth, growth, death, and renewal. It reminds each person that life is a journey, and each stage is sacred. No one is above the other. All things are connected. During colonization, many of these traditions were outlawed. Ceremonies were banned. Spiritual leaders were imprisoned or killed. Sacred objects were stolen and displayed in museums. Yet the spirit did not die. It went underground. Ceremonies continued in hidden places, behind closed doors, or far into the wilderness. Elders preserved songs and passed them on quietly. Medicines were gathered in silence, and in the hearts of the people, the drum never stopped beating. With the passage of the American Indian Religious Freedom Act in 1978, Native peoples finally regained the legal right to practice their spirituality openly. Slowly, the sacred returned to the public. Ceremonies were revived. Sweat lodges were rebuilt. Songs echoed once again across the hills. And in this reawakening, many found not only spiritual strength, but healing. Healing from trauma, from loss, from generations of silence. Tonight, as you close your eyes, imagine a still forest at dawn. A gentle breeze moves through the pines. Somewhere, a low drumbeat begins, steady and slow, like a heartbeat. A voice rises in song, not loud, but full of meaning. You may not know the words, but you feel the message. It is one of reverence, of connection, of return. The spirit of the people is not broken. It flows on, as it always has, through wind, through firelight, through stories, in ceremony, in silence, in the sacred breath of memory. Before the arrival of Europeans, the indigenous peoples of North America lived in a vast array of societies, each adapted to their unique environments and ways of life. While these societies varied widely, from the bustling cities of the Mississippian culture to the nomadic buffalo hunting bands of the Great Plains, the social structures that underpinned daily life shared a common purpose: to sustain and nurture community, identity, and survival. Understanding these social frameworks offers a window into a world where relationships, responsibilities, and rhythms were carefully balanced and deeply interconnected. At the center of Native social organization was the family unit, but not just in the narrow sense we often think of today. Families extended into clans or lineages, groups connected by blood or marriage that traced descent through either maternal or paternal lines, depending on the tribe. These kinship systems created a web of relationships that defined one's place in society and connected individuals to ancestors and future generations. For example, among the Iroquois Confederacy, one of the most sophisticated social and political organizations in pre-contact North America, clans were matrilineal, meaning that family identity and inheritance passed through the mother's line. This matrilineal system gave women significant authority within their communities, influencing decisions about land, leadership, and social affairs. The respect for elders in Native communities was profound and universal. Elders were the living repositories of knowledge, wisdom, and tradition. They taught younger generations through storytelling, ceremonies, and direct instruction, passing down cultural values, history, and survival skills. Elders often held the role of mediators and counselors, helping resolve conflicts within families and communities. Their voices carried the weight of experience and were vital in maintaining harmony and continuity. The care and reverence given to elders reinforced the intergenerational bonds that kept communities connected through time. Within this social framework, roles and responsibilities were generally well defined, but also fluid enough to adapt to changing circumstances. Gender roles varied widely among tribes and were often complementary rather than hierarchical. Men commonly took on duties such as hunting, warfare, and protection, while women typically managed gathering, agriculture, child rearing, and crafting essential goods. However, many tribes honored women with political and spiritual leadership roles. For instance, the Cherokee and Haudenosaunee, Iroquois, societies featured influential women known as clan mothers who played critical roles in nominating leaders and preserving social order. Some tribes even recognized individuals who did not fit within binary gender categories, often referred to today as two-spirit people, who held respected and sacred roles within their communities. The daily life of Native Americans was closely tied to the natural cycles of the land and seasons. Communities organized their activities around hunting seasons, planting and harvesting cycles, and migratory patterns of animals and plants. Cooperation and collective labor were central to survival. Building homes, preparing food, crafting tools, and making clothing were communal efforts, often accompanied by song, storytelling, and teaching. For example, among the coastal Northwest tribes, the construction of large cedar plank houses involved the entire community, from selecting the tree to carving and assembling the structure. This process was more than practical. It was a ceremony that reinforced social ties and shared identity. Trade and exchange networks extended across vast distances, linking tribes from the Arctic to the Gulf Coast and the Great Plains to the eastern woodlands. These networks facilitated the sharing of goods, such as shells, stones, pottery, foodstuffs, and crafted items, but they also promoted cultural interaction and alliance building, trade fairs were often festive occasions that included dancing, feasting, and storytelling, strengthening bonds between peoples and fostering mutual respect. The exchange of ideas and technologies, like bow and arrow designs, agricultural practices, or artistic motifs, helped communities adapt and innovate. Spirituality was deeply interwoven with social life. Native peoples understood the world as animated by spiritual forces that inhabited the land, animals, plants, and elements. Religious leaders, often called shamans, medicine people, or spiritual guides, played essential roles in healing, divination, and conducting ceremonies. These ceremonies marked key moments in individual and community life, including births, rites of passage, marriages, harvests, and times of mourning. They fostered a sense of connection not only among people, but also with the larger cosmos, ensuring that balance and harmony were maintained. Children were raised within this holistic framework, learning from an early age through observation, participation, and storytelling. Education was communal, and elders, parents, and other relatives taught essential skills and cultural knowledge. Games, songs, and rituals were used to instill values such as respect, generosity, courage, and patience. The inclusion of children in ceremonies and daily tasks helped them understand their role within the community and develop a sense of belonging. Within the household, women's work was vital and varied. They prepared meals using sophisticated techniques to preserve and transform food, drying, smoking, and fermenting to sustain the community through harsh seasons. They wove textiles from animal hides and plant fibers, crafted pottery, and made baskets, often imbued with symbolic designs that reflected spiritual beliefs. Men, meanwhile, maintained tools and weapons, hunted game, fished, and protected the community from threats. These roles were not isolated. They depended on one another and on the natural cycles, creating a harmonious rhythm to daily life. The communal nature of native societies fostered a strong sense of shared responsibility and cooperation. Resources such as hunting grounds, fishing waters, and agricultural fields were often shared communally or managed under tribal stewardship to ensure sustainability. This approach was not only practical, but reflected a worldview that emphasized balance and respect for the earth. The idea of ownership was often communal rather than individual, creating social bonds that discouraged greed and fostered generosity. As you rest now, imagine the quiet bustle of a native village at dawn. Smoke rises gently from the cooking fires. Children's laughter mingles with the song of birds, and elders sit sharing stories under the shade of ancient trees. You can feel the pulse of daily life, simple yet rich with purpose and connection. Families work together, hunters prepare for the day, women weave and cook, and the community breathes as one. This picture of social structure in daily life reveals a world carefully balanced by cooperation, respect, and shared responsibility. It is a world where relationships between people, between generations, and with the land form the foundation of existence. In this quiet harmony lies the essence of Indigenous life, a timeless rhythm that continues to inspire and sustain. Leadership and governance among Native American peoples before European contact were deeply rooted in principles of balance, community well-being, and respect. Unlike the centralized monarchies or rigid hierarchies common in Europe, Indigenous political systems were often decentralized, participatory, and fluid, reflecting the values and needs of their communities. Leadership was not about asserting power over others, but about serving the people and maintaining harmony within the tribe and with the natural world. Across the diverse cultures of native North America, governance structures varied widely, yet many shared an emphasis on consensus and collective decision-making. Instead of a single ruler imposing decisions, councils of elders, clan leaders, or appointed representatives would gather to discuss issues, resolve conflicts, and make decisions. The ideal was not majority rule, but consensus, an agreement that considered the perspectives and well-being of all affected. This process fostered inclusion, patience, and dialogue, emphasizing listening as much as speaking. One of the most well-known examples of Indigenous governance is the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, also known as the Iroquois Confederacy. This union of 6 nations created one of the most sophisticated political systems in pre-colonial North America. The Great Council, composed of representatives called sachems, met regularly to deliberate on matters affecting the entire Confederacy, from war and peace to trade and lawmaking. This system balanced the autonomy of each nation with the strength of collective unity, creating a model of governance that emphasized diplomacy, mutual respect, and shared responsibility. Leaders held different titles depending on their tribe: chiefs, sachems, headmen, or clan mothers. But in all cases, leadership was a position of service and moral responsibility. Leaders were expected to embody qualities such as wisdom, humility, courage, and fairness. They led by example rather than by force, mediating disputes, guiding ceremonies, representing the community in negotiations, and protecting the welfare of their people. Importantly, leadership was not necessarily hereditary, though in some tribes it was. It was often earned through demonstrated skill, bravery, or wisdom. A respected leader's authority depended on their ability to serve and inspire, not on coercion. Women played crucial roles in governance and political life in many native societies. Some tribes had matrilineal systems where women had significant political influence, including the power to nominate or remove chiefs. The Haudenosaunee clan mothers were particularly powerful, overseeing the selection of sachems and ensuring that leaders remained accountable to the people. This balance of power between genders contributed to social harmony and underscored the respect for diverse contributions within the community. Justice systems within native societies reflected their broader values of balance and restoration, rather than punishment and retribution. When conflicts or wrongdoings occurred, the goal was to restore harmony between individuals, families, and the community. Punishments were designed to heal rather than simply to penalize. Mediation was a common practice, with respected elders or leaders helping to resolve disputes through dialogue and mutual understanding. Compensation, ceremonies, and reconciliation processes were often employed to repair relationships and reintegrate offenders into the community. For example, among the Navajo, restorative justice practices include family meetings where all parties come together to discuss harm done and agree on ways to make amends. These approaches emphasize accountability, forgiveness, and healing. They seek to balance the needs of victims with those of offenders, recognizing the interconnectedness of all members of the community. Warfare existed among many tribes, but was often highly ritualized and limited in scope. It was typically engaged in to defend territory, protect resources, or resolve conflicts, rather than for conquest or expansion. Leaders had to weigh carefully the consequences of war, knowing that the well-being of their people depended on balance and peace. Negotiations and treaties were important tools for maintaining relations between tribes and managing conflict without violence. Within these political and social structures, spiritual and ceremonial leaders also held significant influence. Shamans, medicine people, or spiritual guides advised leaders and communities, conducted rituals, and interpreted spiritual guidance. The spiritual and political realms were intertwined, with ceremonies often serving to legitimize leadership and laws. This integration underscored the sacred responsibility of governance and the belief that leaders were accountable not only to their people, but also to the spirit world and ancestors. The role of leaders extended beyond human affairs. They were guardians of. Leaders extended beyond human affairs. They were guardians of the natural world, tasked with ensuring that the community lived in balance with the environment. This sense of stewardship was foundational. Leaders made decisions about resource use, land management, and hunting practices to sustain the community and respect the earth. The health of the people was seen as inseparable from the health of the land. In the quiet moments, envision a tribal council gathered beneath an open sky. Elders and leaders sit in a circle, voices calm but purposeful. They listen deeply to one another, weighing the needs and hopes of the community. The air is filled with respect and the weight of responsibility. Each word carries the intention to maintain harmony, to serve the collective good. This is governance as an act of care, a delicate balance of power and humility. Imagine also the gentle presence of the clan mothers, their eyes wise and watchful, guiding leadership with quiet strength. Visualize a mediator easing tensions with patience and kindness, helping a family find peace after conflict. See a spiritual leader invoking blessings for the community's well-being, connecting the human and natural worlds. This part of the story reveals leadership and justice not as distant or harsh institutions, but as living practices rooted in respect, dialogue, and care. It teaches us that true authority is earned through service, and that justice is about healing, balance, and the restoration of relationships. These ancient systems offer timeless lessons in how communities can thrive through cooperation and mutual respect. As you relax into sleep, let these images settle gently in your mind. The council circle, the peaceful resolution of conflict, the sacred duty of leaders, and the ongoing dance of balance that sustains life. Feel the deep, calm strength of governance rooted in harmony, a guiding light for a people connected to each other and the world around them. Spirituality and tradition formed the very heartbeat of Native American life before European contact. Across the vast landscapes, from the towering forests of the Northeast to the rolling plains, deserts, and coastal shores, Indigenous peoples maintained a deep and abiding connection to the natural world and the unseen forces they believed animated all life. This connection was expressed through ceremonies, rituals, stories, and customs that shaped individual identity, social cohesion, and the community's relationship with the cosmos. The sacred pulse of society was found in the traditions that guided every step of life's journey. For Native peoples, the world was alive with spirit. Mountains, rivers, animals, plants, and even the wind carried their own essence and power. This animistic worldview taught that everything was interconnected and that maintaining balance among these forces was essential for survival and well-being. Spiritual leaders, sometimes called shamans, medicine men or women, or healers, served as mediators between the physical and spiritual worlds. They performed healing rituals, offered guidance, and communicated with spirits to protect and sustain their communities. Ceremonies were the vital expressions of this spiritual life, marking important moments in the cycle of seasons, the phases of life, and communal events. Many tribes held annual festivals that celebrated the planting and harvesting seasons, the first hunt, or the renewal of the earth's fertility. These festivals were occasions for feasting, dancing, singing, and storytelling, creating a sacred space where people could reconnect with the land and one another. For example, the Sundance ceremony among Plains tribes was a powerful ritual of renewal, sacrifice, and prayer that reinforced individual and communal strength. Rites of passage were deeply significant in Native societies. From birth through adolescence, adulthood, marriage, and death, each stage was marked by ceremonies that celebrated transformation and growth. A child's naming ceremony, for instance, was not just a formality, but a spiritual act connecting the individual to ancestors and the tribe. Adolescence often involved vision quests or fasting ceremonies, where young people sought spiritual guidance and personal purpose. Marriage ceremonies united families and clans, often accompanied by gifts, dances, and the sharing of stories. Death and mourning also had profound ceremonial importance. The passing of a community member was honored with rituals designed to ease their journey into the spirit world and to comfort the living. These ceremonies affirmed the continuity of life and the ongoing relationship between the ancestors and the present community. Many tribes believed that the spirits of the deceased remained close, watching over their descendants and influencing the living world. Storytelling was another essential tradition that intertwined history, morality, and spirituality. Elders and storytellers wove narratives that explained the origins of the world, taught lessons about respect and courage, and preserved tribal laws and customs. These stories were performed with rhythm, gesture, and sometimes music, creating a living oral history that strengthened identity and transmitted values across generations. For example, the creation stories of the Navajo, the Haudenosaunee, and countless other tribes offered rich insights into their worldview and relationship with nature. Music and dance were integral to these ceremonies and daily life, serving both practical and spiritual purposes. Drumming, chanting, flute playing, and singing created sounds that connected participants with spiritual realms, guided healing processes, and celebrated life. Dance was a form of prayer, a way to embody stories and connect the human body with cosmic rhythms. These artistic expressions were not mere entertainment, but sacred acts that nurtured the soul of the community. Traditional arts such as beadwork, pottery, carving, and weaving were often imbued with spiritual symbolism. Patterns and colors carried meanings tied to the tribe's beliefs and stories. The creation of these items was itself a ritual act, done with intention and respect. These objects were used in daily life, gifted during ceremonies, or carried as talismans for protection and luck. The relationship between humans and animals held special spiritual significance. Many tribes believed that animals were their relatives and teachers, each species possessing unique wisdom and power. Totem poles of the Northwest Coast, for example, represented family histories and spiritual guardians, combining artistry with deep cultural meaning. Hunting was accompanied by rituals thanking the spirit of the animal for its sacrifice and ensuring respect for the balance of life. Sacred landscapes, mountains, rivers, caves, and groves were places where the veil between worlds was thin. These sites were pilgrimage destinations, prayer places, or the settings for ceremonies. They were treated with reverence, protected as the heart of the tribe's spiritual connection to the earth. Through these traditions, Native peoples lived in continuous dialogue with their environment and ancestors. Their spirituality was not confined to special places or times, but flowed through every moment, every task, and every relationship. This holistic vision fostered a profound sense of belonging and responsibility to the community and the world. As you ease into rest, imagine the gentle drum beats echoing under a starlit sky, the graceful movements of dancers embodying ancient stories, and the soothing voice of an elder recounting tales of creation and courage. Feel the sacred rhythm of the seasons turning, the quiet prayers whispered to the wind and rain. Picture the quiet firelight flickering on the faces of a gathered community, united in song, story, and reverence. This sacred pulse of tradition and ceremony sustained Indigenous societies, nurturing them through centuries. It is a timeless heartbeat of connection, respect, and renewal that continues to inspire and heal. In the stillness of your mind, allow these images and sounds to lull you gently toward rest, carrying with them the profound peace of a world in balance, alive with spirit. As we come toward the present day and glance forward into the future, the story of Native American life is one of remarkable resilience and renewal. Despite centuries of hardship, displacement, forced assimilation, and attempts to erase entire cultures, the spirit of Native peoples remains strong, persistent, and hopeful. This part invites you to reflect on the ongoing work of healing, education, and rebuilding that is quietly transforming communities today, and will continue to do so for generations to come. One of the most powerful signs of renewal is found in the commitment to education. Across tribal lands and in urban Native communities, schools, colleges, and programs are dedicated not only to the basics of reading and math, but also to teaching Native history, language, and cultural values. These institutions are more than places of learning. They are vital centers for cultural preservation and growth. Tribal colleges and universities, which began to emerge in the late 20th century, provide environments where Indigenous perspectives shape the curriculum, allowing students to explore science, arts, and leadership through a lens that honors their heritage. These schools nurture the next generation of leaders, those who will carry the responsibility of governance, environmental stewardship, and cultural revival. Language revitalization is a cornerstone of this educational renewal. Once endangered, many Native languages are experiencing a rebirth, taught in classrooms, learned through apps, and shared in homes. Language is much more than words. It is a way of understanding the world, a way of connecting deeply to identity, history, and spirituality. Through language, the stories, songs, and teachings of ancestors come alive again. It is a deliberate and sometimes difficult process, as many Native peoples lost fluent speakers due to boarding school policies and cultural suppression. But the effort to reclaim language is an act of resistance, a healing journey, and a gift for future generations. Healing is not limited to education. It reaches into the very heart of communities where decades of trauma have left scars. Many Native communities face challenges such as poverty, substance abuse, and health disparities, consequences of systemic marginalization. However, healing efforts blend modern healthcare with traditional practices. Holistic wellness centers, often located on reservations, offer sweat lodge ceremonies, herbal medicines, and counseling that respects both Indigenous spiritual beliefs and Western medical practices. These centers emphasize balance between body, mind, and spirit, reflecting a worldview that has guided Native peoples for millennia. Mental health programs focus on confronting intergenerational trauma, the emotional wounds passed down through families affected by forced removals, assimilation policies, and loss of culture. They work to restore hope, identity, and strength. Healing ceremonies, storytelling, and community gatherings play a vital role in restoring the spirit, creating safe spaces where people can share grief and joy, remember ancestors, and renew their connection to culture. This holistic approach acknowledges that true wellness is more than physical health. It is emotional, spiritual, and communal. Community and family form the foundation of this healing and renewal. The roles of elders are honored with reverence. They are the keepers of stories, languages, and ceremonies. Their wisdom is a guiding light for youth, who are seen not just as the future, but as the living present of their peoples. The bond between generations strengthens the fabric of Native life, ensuring continuity and resilience. Families nurture children with traditions, teachings, and love, reminding them of their identity and responsibilities. The revival of cultural practices, powwows, dances, art, and ceremonies also strengthens community bonds. These gatherings are joyful affirmations of life and identity, spaces where old and young share knowledge and celebrate heritage. The drumbeat, songs, regalia, and dances are not just performances, they are expressions of belonging and survival. In these moments, the spirit of the people is visible and vibrant. As you rest now, imagine the gentle warmth of a fire circle where voices rise in song. Picture a young student learning her ancestral language, the sounds weaving through the air like a thread connecting past to future. Visualize a healing lodge filled with soft steam and prayers, where the pain of the past begins to dissolve into hope. Feel the quiet strength of a community, holding each other close, working together to build a world where identity is honored and life can flourish once more. This is the ongoing journey of renewal, a path lit by education, healing, and the unbreakable bonds of family and community. It is a journey that continues quietly, steadily, like a river carving a new course through time, shaping the landscape of tomorrow with grace and determination. As we continue to explore the journey forward for Native American communities, we find ourselves deeply connected to the land, an enduring relationship that shapes identity, culture, and survival. For Indigenous peoples, the earth is not simply a resource to be used, but a sacred relative to be honored, protected, and nurtured. This profound respect for the natural world has guided Native stewardship for thousands of years, and now plays a crucial role in contemporary efforts to protect the environment and assert sovereignty. Environmental stewardship among Native communities is rooted in ancient teachings that emphasize balance, reciprocity, and responsibility. The land provides food, medicine, and shelter, but it also holds spirit. Mountains, rivers, forests, and animals are living entities with whom people share kinship. This worldview fosters a deep sense of care and guardianship, where taking only what is needed and giving back to the earth ensures harmony and sustainability. These values resonate strongly in the modern era, as climate change and environmental degradation threaten ecosystems worldwide. Many tribes lead innovative efforts to protect their ancestral lands and natural resources. They advocate for clean water, healthy forests, and wildlife preservation. For example, Native nations have fought legal battles to protect sacred sites from mining, drilling, and construction projects. These struggles often highlight the clash between economic development and cultural preservation. Yet Native leaders and communities persist, relying on both traditional knowledge and modern science to guide their actions. Environmental education programs teach youth about the importance of stewardship, blending ecological science with indigenous teachings. The protection of water is especially vital. Rivers and lakes are lifelines, sources of life for humans, plants, and animals alike. Many Native communities have spearheaded campaigns to prevent pollution, ensure clean drinking water, and restore fish populations. Water is considered a sacred gift, and protecting it is a moral imperative that crosses generations. The phrase, "water is life," has become a powerful rallying cry in movements led by Indigenous activists, drawing global attention to the urgent need for environmental justice. Sovereignty, the inherent right of Native nations to govern themselves and their lands, is deeply tied to environmental stewardship. Sovereignty is a complex and evolving concept encompassing political, legal, and cultural dimensions. It affirms that tribes have the authority to make decisions regarding their communities, resources, and future. This includes managing natural resources according to traditional laws and customs, protecting sacred places, and regulating economic activities. Throughout history, sovereignty has been challenged repeatedly by colonial governments seeking to control indigenous lands and peoples. Treaties were broken, borders imposed, and rights ignored. However, Native nations continue to assert their sovereignty through legal battles, policy negotiations, and self-governance initiatives. These efforts have resulted in significant victories, including the recognition of tribal courts, the return of some lands, and the ability to manage natural resources and social services independently. The exercise of sovereignty enables tribes to develop sustainable economies that respect cultural values and environmental limits. Many Native communities pursue renewable energy projects, organic farming, and ecotourism, combining economic growth with ecological integrity. Tribal enterprises provide jobs and resources while maintaining a commitment to the land. These endeavors reflect a vision of the future where economic well-being and environmental health are intertwined. Cultural preservation is also a key aspect of sovereignty. By protecting languages, ceremonies, and traditions, tribes strengthen their identity and resilience. These cultural practices often revolve around the land and natural cycles, harvesting plants at the right time, honoring animal spirits, and celebrating seasonal changes. Sovereignty ensures that tribes can continue these practices freely, passing them on to future generations. Collaboration is another important aspect of contemporary environmental and sovereignty efforts. Many Native nations work with governments, environmental organizations, and other indigenous peoples to address common challenges. These partnerships help protect larger ecosystems, share resources and knowledge, and to amplify voices advocating for justice and sustainability. Indigenous perspectives are increasingly recognized as essential to global conversations about the environment. As you rest now, picture a quiet forest where the morning light filters through ancient trees. Imagine a river flowing clear and strong, its waters shimmering with the reflections of the sky. Hear the gentle rustle of leaves and the call of birds, a symphony of life sustained by care and respect. Visualize a gathering of tribal leaders and youth, planning ways to protect this sacred land, blending the wisdom of ancestors with modern tools. Feel the deep, steady pulse of sovereignty, a heartbeat that says, "We are here, we endure, we protect." This part of the journey forward is a story of guardianship, of land, culture, and rights. It is a testament to the enduring bond between Native peoples and the earth, a bond that continues to inspire, teach, and sustain. In this quiet strength lies the promise of a future where life flourishes in balance and where the voices of indigenous nations guide us all toward a more just and sustainable world. As we arrive at the final chapter of this journey, it is fitting to reflect on the vital role that culture, art, and community play in the ongoing story of Native American life. These elements are the living heartbeat of identity and continuity, carrying the wisdom of ancestors forward while embracing new expressions of creativity and connection. In the quiet moments of ceremony, in the vibrant energy of celebration, and in the intimate sharing of stories, Native communities reaffirm who they are and nurture the bonds that sustain them. Culture is the foundation of belonging. It is expressed in language, stories, ceremonies, and everyday traditions that connect individuals to their heritage and to each other. Despite centuries of disruption, Native peoples have maintained and revived these practices with great care. Today, ceremonies continue to mark important moments: birth, coming of age, marriage, healing, and remembrance, offering spaces for spiritual renewal and communal support. These gatherings are often rich with symbolism, rhythm, and meaning, reminding participants of their place in the cycle of life and their connection to the land and to the community. Powwows, with their drumming, singing, and dancing, remain one of the most visible and joyous expressions of Native culture. These events bring together tribes from near and far, creating a space of celebration and cultural exchange. The dancers' regalia, crafted with feathers, beads, and intricate patterns, tell stories of family, clan, and spiritual beliefs. The drumbeat echoes like a heartbeat, grounding the event in tradition and vitality. For many, powwows are not only celebrations, but also acts of cultural preservation and resistance, affirming identity in the face of history's attempts at erasure. Art, in its many forms, continues to be a powerful medium for Native expression. From traditional crafts like beadwork, pottery, and weaving to contemporary painting, sculpture, and digital media, Native artists explore themes of identity, history, and social justice. Their work often challenges stereotypes, tells untold stories, and invites viewers into a deeper understanding of Indigenous perspectives. Museums and galleries increasingly recognize Native art not merely as artifacts of the past, but as vibrant, evolving expressions of culture. Art is a way for Native peoples to honor ancestors, critique injustices, and imagine new futures. Storytelling remains a central cultural pillar. Oral traditions, passed down from elders to youth, are rich with lessons, histories, and spiritual teachings. These stories connect individuals to their roots and to universal human experiences. In recent years, Native writers, filmmakers, and performers have gained wider audiences, sharing their narratives with the world. Their voices bring nuance, humor, and strength to the conversation about identity and history. Storytelling becomes a bridge between generations and between cultures, fostering understanding and respect. Community bonds are the threads that weave individuals into a strong, resilient fabric. Family remains at the core, with extended kinship networks providing support, guidance, and love. Elders are revered as the keepers of wisdom, offering guidance not only through words, but through example and presence. Youth are cherished and nurtured, encouraged to learn the languages, customs, and values of their ancestors while pursuing their own dreams. The intergenerational connections create continuity, a living legacy carried forward. Modern technology has also become a tool for cultural connection. Social media platforms enable Native communities to share ceremonies, art, language lessons, and news with members scattered across vast distances. Virtual powwows, language apps, and online forums create new spaces for gathering and learning, especially important for those who live far from their home communities. Technology, once seen as a potential threat to tradition, is now embraced as a means of preservation and innovation. The resilience of culture and community is also evident in the ways Native peoples address contemporary challenges. Many communities organize around issues such as healthcare, education, economic development, and legal rights, drawing strength from cultural identity. Traditional values of cooperation, respect, and balance guide these efforts, fostering holistic approaches to well-being. In this way, culture is not static, but dynamic, responsive and adaptive, capable of sustaining people through change. As you lie quietly now, imagine the soft glow of a fire at a community gathering, the flicker of flames reflecting in smiling faces. Hear the steady rhythm of the drum, the rising voices in song, the laughter of children learning to dance. Picture an elder sharing a story, their voice weaving history and hope into the night air. See a young artist at work, colors blending on canvas to tell a story, both ancient and new. Feel the warmth of community, a web of connection that holds and uplifts. This concluding part of the journey invites us to rest in the beauty and strength of Native culture and community bonds. They are the enduring pulse that carries the past into the present and onward into the future. The story of Native America is not one of endings, but of ongoing life, of traditions lived and renewed, of identities celebrated, and of communities united by shared history and hope. As sleep gently takes you, may you carry with you the quiet strength of these stories, the deep rhythms of the drum, and the timeless spirit of a people whose journey continues, full of resilience, creativity, and heart.